There is a prison that most human beings spend their entire lives inside of. A prison with invisible walls, invisible bars, invisible guards. You walk around thinking you're free, making choices, living your life. But every decision you make, every word you speak, every emotion you express or suppress, all of it is being controlled by a single force. That force is the fear of rejection. And Sigmund Freud understood something that most people never grasp. This fear is not just an inconvenience or a personality quirk. This fear is the architect of your entire existence. It shapes your relationships, your career, your sense of self. It determines what you pursue and what you avoid. It decides who you become and who you never allow yourself to be. And the moment you stop fearing rejection, not through bravado or false confidence, but through genuine psychological transformation, you become free. Not free from consequences, not free from pain, but free from the invisible prison. Free to be yourself. Free to choose based on what you actually want, rather than what will keep you safe from rejection. Free to live rather than merely survive. This is what Freud spent much of his career exploring. The ways that human beings construct elaborate prisons for themselves in the name of safety. The ways we sacrifice authenticity for acceptance. The ways we kill our own aliveness to avoid the terror of being cast out, being alone, being deemed unworthy. And he understood that most people never escape these prisons because they don't even know they're in them. Let's start with a fundamental truth about human psychology that Freud articulated in various ways throughout his work. We are social creatures whose survival once depended entirely on belonging to the group. To be rejected by the tribe was to die. This wasn't metaphorical. This was literal. A human being alone in nature, cast out from the protection and resources of the group, would not survive. So, evolution wired us to fear rejection at the deepest possible level. It wired the fear into our nervous system. It made rejection feel like a threat to our very existence. But here's what changed, and what most people's psyches haven't caught up to. In modern life, rejection is no longer life-threatening. You can be rejected by every person you know, and you will still survive. You will still have access to food, shelter, safety. You will still exist. But your nervous system doesn't know this. Your nervous system is still operating as if rejection equals death. So it does everything in its power to help you avoid rejection. It constrains your behavior, it limits your self-expression, it makes you perform and please and adjust and conform, all in service of the primal imperative: do not be cast out. This is where the prison begins. Because the strategies that keep you safe from rejection are the same strategies that keep you from being yourself. The mask you wear to be acceptable is the mask that prevents you from being known. The performance you deliver to secure approval is the performance that guarantees you'll never be seen for who you actually are. The parts of yourself you hide to avoid judgment are the parts that contain your vitality, your creativity, your passion, your authentic desire. Freud understood this paradox deeply. He saw it in every patient who walked into his office. People who were successful by all external measures, but who felt dead inside. People who had secured all the approval and acceptance they thought they needed, but who felt profoundly alone. People who had perfected the art of not being rejected, but who had no idea who they actually were beneath the performance. The fear of rejection operates at multiple levels. At the surface level, it's the fear of what will happen if someone doesn't like you, doesn't approve of you, doesn't accept you. You'll feel embarrassed, you'll feel ashamed, you'll feel the sting of judgment. This surface-level fear is uncomfortable, but manageable. Most people can tolerate occasional rejection at this level. But beneath this surface fear is a deeper terror. The terror is that rejection reveals something true about you. That if someone rejects you, it means you are fundamentally flawed, fundamentally unworthy, fundamentally unlovable. That the rejection is not about their preferences or their limitations or the particular circumstance. The rejection is about your essential inadequacy. And if one person sees this inadequacy, then everyone might see it. And if everyone sees it, then you'll be exposed. You'll be alone. You'll be cast out. You'll die. This is the catastrophic thinking that lives in the unconscious. This is what Freud meant when he talked about the ways our primitive fears continue to govern our supposedly civilized lives. We're not consciously thinking, if this person rejects me, I will die. But that's what our nervous system is telling us. That's the felt sense in the body. That's the panic that arises when rejection seems imminent. And to protect against this terror, we construct elaborate defenses. We become chameleons, adjusting ourselves to fit whatever environment we're in. We become pleasers, prioritizing others' needs and preferences over our own. We become achievers, believing that if we're successful enough, accomplished enough, impressive enough, we'll be immune to rejection. We become withdrawn, limiting our exposure so that we limit our vulnerability. We become aggressive, rejecting others before they can reject us. All of these strategies work, temporarily. They help you avoid the immediate pain of rejection, but they come at a cost. The cost is your freedom. The cost is your authenticity. The cost is your aliveness. Because when you organize your entire life around avoiding rejection, you stop living your life and start performing a life that you think will keep you safe. Freud saw this pattern destroying people. He saw people in their 40s and 50s waking up to the recognition that they had never been themselves, that they had spent decades performing, that they had built a life that looked successful but felt empty, that they had relationships where they were liked but not known, that they had achieved approval but sacrificed authenticity. And the tragedy is that the approval they worked so hard to secure never actually made them feel secure, because approval based on performance is inherently unstable. You have to keep performing to keep the approval. You can never rest. You can never let the mask slip. You can never show the parts of yourself that don't fit the performance. So the prison just gets smaller and tighter and more suffocating as time goes on. Now, Freud's insight, and this is crucial, was not just about recognizing the problem. It was about understanding the solution. And the solution is not to become reckless or antagonistic, or to deliberately court rejection as some form of psychological exposure therapy. The solution is to fundamentally transform your relationship with rejection, to stop experiencing rejection as a commentary on your fundamental worth, to see rejection for what it actually is: information about fit, about preferences, about circumstance, about the other person's psychology, but not information about whether you deserve to exist. This transformation doesn't happen through intellectual understanding alone. You can't think your way out of the fear of rejection. The fear is too deep. It's too wired into your nervous system. It's too connected to your survival mechanisms. The transformation happens through experience, through the gradual, repeated experience of being rejected and discovering that you don't die, that you remain intact, that your sense of self remains coherent, that your worth is not actually determined by whether any particular person accepts you. But most people never allow themselves to have this experience, because to have this experience requires you to risk rejection. It requires you to show yourself, to speak your truth, to express your preferences, to set boundaries, to disappoint people, to be visible as yourself rather than as a carefully curated performance. And the fear of rejection prevents you from taking these risks. So you remain in the prison, convinced that the walls are protecting you, never realizing that the walls are what's killing you. Freud worked with people to help them take these risks gradually, to slowly expand the range of authentic self-expression, to test whether the catastrophic consequences they feared would actually materialize. And what people discovered when they did this work was revelatory. They discovered that most rejection is not catastrophic. Most people, when you show them who you actually are, either accept you or move on without drama. The apocalyptic scenarios that play out in your imagination almost never happen in reality. And here's what else they discovered. The people who reject you when you're authentic are people who were only accepting your performance, not you. Their rejection, painful as it might be, is actually clarifying. It's information that this person or situation was never going to satisfy your need for genuine connection anyway. Their acceptance of your false self was worthless. Their rejection of your true self is valuable. It frees you to find people who can actually see you and still choose to be with you. This is where the freedom begins. When you realize that rejection based on your authentic self is better than acceptance based on your false self, when you realize that being alone and authentic is better than being connected and inauthentic, when you realize that the terror of rejection was worse than the reality of rejection, when you realize that you can be rejected and survive, that you can be judged and remain whole, that you can be cast out and still exist, that's when the prison walls start to crumble. And what emerges when the walls come down is something Freud considered essential to psychological health. the capacity to desire authentically, to know what you actually want rather than what you think you should want, to pursue what you actually desire rather than what will secure approval, to choose relationships and work and ways of being that actually satisfy you rather than choices that keep you safe from rejection. Because here's the thing, as long as you're afraid of rejection, you can't know what you actually want. Every desire is filtered through the question, will this lead to acceptance or rejection? You can't trust your own preferences because you've been overriding them your entire life in favor of preferences that keep you safe. You can't trust your own feelings because you've been suppressing feelings that might lead to judgment. You can't trust your own perceptions because you've been distorting your perceptions to maintain relationships, even when those relationships are damaging. When you stop fearing rejection, you gain access to yourself. You gain access to your authentic desires, your authentic feelings, your authentic perceptions. And from that place of authenticity, you can make choices that actually serve your life. You can pursue relationships that actually nourish you. You can do work that actually means something to you. You can live in ways that actually feel alive rather than ways that feel safe but dead. This is the freedom that Freud pointed toward. Not freedom from difficulty or challenge or loss, but freedom from the tyranny of others' opinions, freedom from the constant surveillance of the internalized judge, freedom from the performance, freedom to be yourself and to accept the consequences of being yourself, knowing that those consequences, even rejection, are better than the slow death of living inauthentically. But this freedom requires courage. It requires you to face the fear rather than avoid it. It requires you to risk the thing you've been most afraid of. It requires you to show yourself knowing that some people will reject you. It requires you to speak your truth knowing that some people will judge you. It requires you to set boundaries knowing that some people will be angry. It requires you to pursue your desires knowing that some people will disapprove. And each time you do this, each time you take the risk and survive the rejection, something in your psyche shifts. The fear becomes less intense. The prison walls become less solid. Your sense of self becomes less dependent on external approval. You start to trust that you can handle rejection. You start to believe that your worth is not determined by whether everyone likes you. You start to experience the freedom of being yourself. Freud understood that this process is not linear. You don't just face your fear of rejection once, and then you're free forever. The fear will resurface. The old patterns will reassert themselves. You'll find yourself performing again, censoring again, adjusting again. But if you keep coming back to the practice of authenticity, if you keep taking the risk of being yourself, the freedom becomes more stable. The prison becomes less convincing. Your capacity to tolerate rejection grows stronger. And eventually you reach a point where rejection doesn't feel catastrophic anymore. It feels like information. It feels like clarification. It feels like the natural consequence of being visible as yourself in a world where not everyone will resonate with who you are. And that's okay. That's not a tragedy. That's just reality. Some people will see you and accept you. Some people will see you and reject you. Neither response determines your fundamental worth. Neither response should dictate whether you continue being yourself. This is psychological maturity. This is what Freud meant by the healthy ego. Not an ego that's inflated or defended, but an ego that's stable enough to withstand rejection without fragmenting. An ego that knows its own worth independent of external validation. An ego that can be authentic even when authenticity leads to disapproval. And from this place of maturity, from this place of freedom, from the fear of rejection, your entire life changes. Your relationships become more genuine because you're showing up as yourself rather than as a performance. Your work becomes more meaningful because you're pursuing what actually matters to you rather than what will impress others. Your emotional life becomes richer because you're allowing yourself to feel rather than suppressing feelings that might be judged. Your capacity for joy increases because you're not constantly scanning for threats to your acceptability. You become free, not free from consequences, not free from pain, not free from the reality that being yourself will sometimes lead to rejection, but free from the prison of fear, free from the tyranny of the performance, free from the constant anxiety about whether you're acceptable enough, free to live as yourself, with all the risk and vulnerability and aliveness that entails. This is what Freud knew. This is what he spent his career trying to help people understand and achieve, not through some technique or practice, but through the courage to face the fear of rejection and discover that on the other side of that fear is not death, but freedom. Not annihilation, but authenticity. Not the end, but the beginning of actually living. The question is whether you're willing to walk through that fear, whether you're willing to risk rejection in order to gain freedom, whether you're willing to stop performing in order to start being, whether you're willing to let some people reject you so that other people can actually see you and choose you for who you really are. Because until you do this, until you stop fearing rejection, you remain in the prison. You remain performing. You remain censoring yourself and adjusting yourself and killing your own aliveness in the name of safety. And one day you'll wake up and realize that the safety wasn't worth it, that you traded your life for approval, that you died 1,000 small deaths to avoid the one fear you could never face. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can choose differently. You can face the fear. You can risk rejection. You can show yourself. You can speak your truth. You can be authentic. And yes, some people will reject you. Some people will judge you. Some people will walk away. But you will survive. You will remain whole. You will discover that rejection is not death. And in that discovery, you will find the freedom that Freud knew was the birthright of every human being who has the courage to claim it. When you stop fearing rejection, you become free. That's not a promise of ease. That's a promise of authenticity. That's a promise of life. And that's a promise worth pursuing, no matter how terrifying the journey might be. Because on the other side of that terror is something that most people never experience: the simple, profound freedom of being yourself.